Hi, this is Raf Alvarado and welcome to Exploratory Text Analytics. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the concept of topic models. So let's situate this with respect to what we studied last time. So we saw with LSA and PCA applied to text that we can shed light on topics. Remember, a topic is, in the context of our last module, was what we called that which sort of defines the subject matter of a text independent of its specific terms. We had this issue of wanting to compare as similar two texts which may use a different word for the same thing. And we used a method to surface that similarity by exploring the co-occurrence of terms in documents. Strong as that method is, one of its limitations is that it assigns a single topic to a text, and we know that texts often concern many topics, and so we'd like to find a method that would allow us to actually find a mixture of topics associated with a text. So a text may be about genetics and it might be about agriculture at the same time, for example. So there's a method for doing this, a general method that we'll call topic modeling. And the approach that we're going to look at today can be described in this way. Topic models are a class of unsupervised machine learning algorithms that are able to assign labels to words in a document. This is not the usual definition that you're going to see about a topic model, but this really corresponds to what's happening at the level of the data, and certainly what's happening when you look at the transformation of a vector space model of a document term matrix into a topic model. What you're essentially doing is labeling the words in a document, and instead of assigning the whole document a label, you're assigning each word a label, and then you're summing up the distribution of those labels to get the mixture of topics for a document. Typically, the number of labels that you use are small relative to the size of the corpus. There is no maximum limit to topics or labels in this context, but often you won't see them exceed 200. I mean, sometimes you do see them get up beyond that, but in general, sort of the 25th and 75th percentiles, if you will, between the interquartile range, if you will, would probably be between something like 10 and 200 if you were to do some kind of survey. And interestingly, as you'll see, each label, each topic is essentially a language model that assigns probabilities to words. So you're going to see that a text is a mixture of different language models, and these particular models are called topics. The distribution of labels in a document provides a summary representation of the document and thereby solves one of the problems of information retrieval. It's a technique that you can use for document summarization if you'd like. We're going to go into a little bit more about the uses of topic models that go beyond this. Finally, topic models can be seen as performing a kind of soft clustering as opposed to hard clustering. Hard clustering is where you, as we've said here in terms of setting up the problem, hard clustering is where you have one topic for per document, sort of one category, and soft clustering is where you actually have a mixture. And so we often actually use that expression. We say that a document has a mixture of topics. So here's a visual representation of what we're talking about. On the top, you'll see a set of topics. You see two topics, and you'll see them represented with words that are of decreasing size. And so what that's representing is the probability of the word in each document. So in topic 1, the word organize has a very high probability, and lead has a second level probability, or rank 2, if you will, and so forth. Topic 2, we see that mercury and pollute have high levels, high frequencies within that topic. And you also notice that the word lead is in both, or lead and lead are in both. And what that's showing you is that a topic model can also handle another issue, which is polysemy, and that's very important. The fact that the same word can have different meanings is actually handled by the topic modeling algorithm. And then what you see is that each document is a mixture of those topics in relative proportions. So the idea here is the document on the left has more of topic 1 than it does of topic 2. The document on the right is the reverse. Here's the diagram that comes from Bly's essay that I've asked you to read, the more general one pitched to a more general audience. And what it's showing you is sort of the ground up representation of how a topic model connects to documents. So you can imagine a document such as this, Seeking Life's Bare Necessities, Genetic Necessities, an article about genetics and some other things. And you can imagine that throughout that article, certain words are going to be associated with certain topics. And here they're given color codes. We have 4 colors and 4 topics. On the left, you can see the topics. One that looks like it's about genetics, one that's like about life, the other one's about the brain, and the other one's about data and computation. You can come up with glosses of those topics if you'd like. They seem like they're pretty clear cut. But what you can see is the article is a relative mixture of those topics. And that mixture is represented by the histogram in the margin there. So you can see that this document has more of genetics in it than the second most frequent topic, which is about biology. And here is another representation where you're looking at a specific document and how you represent the mixture of topics in a document. So on the right, you'll see these are 4 topics that we saw before. These are labeled now. They have glosses. Actually, it's not the exact same as we saw before, but it's close. And on the left, you'll see a histogram of the concentration of each topic in the document. So that histogram refers to one document. It refers to the topic proportions in the document. So what are topic models good for? So I mentioned earlier document summarization. And they're often also used as a way to index documents, create a kind of a small index of a large collection of text. So you can imagine having, say, thousands and thousands of scientific abstracts, and you come up with a topic model of 20 or 100 topics. You've reduced the complexity of that corpus to a much smaller number, and then you can traverse that collection using the topics as your index. But there's another value to this that's consistent with the purpose of this class in focusing on the knowledge discovery aspect of unsupervised learning, and that is that topic models surface not just latent topics, but latent semantic structures that exist across and within a collection. And these are very close. They are, I would argue, cultural models. And so what topic modeling does is allow us to read collections of documents as bearers of cultural information and to extract from these bearers of cultural information these structural models, these cultural models. So what we're doing is we're using topic models in this case not to predict language in the sense that we use language models. We talked about language models earlier as ways of predicting whether a document conforms to one language model or another, but really to tell a story about what's in the corpus. And we're going to look at some examples, some pretty good ones actually, of how topic modeling has been used to tell some very interesting stories about history and culture and society. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, after looking at the gory details of how topic models are generated, we're going to spend some time in a follow-up module on how to actually interpret the results of a topic model, what I call how to read a topic model. So again, looking at topic models as a method, although it's similar to methods like PCA in the sense that it takes the document term vector space representation of a text and in a sense decomposes it, it doesn't work on the principle of direct matrix decomposition the way that PSA and LSI do. Remember that PSA and LSI use eigendecomposition and singular value decomposition to operate on that matrix to produce 2 or 3 component matrices. The way that topic modeling works, in particular the method we're going to look at here, is through something called a generative approach. It imagines a model of how a text might be generated, and then it models that approach, that generative process mathematically, and then it tries to do some reverse causal inference based on that model. It's a much different approach to things. It's more complicated, but the results are more satisfying. And also, just as a historical side note, topic models began as probabilistic versions of LSI and LSA. There's a transitional paper by Hoffman that I have as an optional reading called Probabilistic LSI, and later he calls it Probabilistic LSA. And it's a transitional point between the older sort of, decompositional approach and this more generative approach. A little bit of semantics here. Topic model stands for a class of methods, but what we're going to look at here is something called LDA, which stands for Latent Dirichlet Allocation, and that was invented by Bly, Ng, and Jordan in 2003. That's a paper that you're asked to look at. LDA is a generalization of the paper I just described to you, Hoffman's 1999 paper on probabilistic latent semantic indexing. It's also important to note that LDA, what you're going to see, is not the only method. It's taken up, sort of the market share or the mind share of what topic modeling is, but it's really among the simplest topic models you can do, and there are many variations of topic modeling out there. So let's look at how LDA works. Here's a comparison just visually of the two approaches I described. One is through matrix decomposition, and the other is through positing this generative process. So on the top you see LSA, you have your Word document matrix, and that gets decomposed through either singular value decomposition or eigen decomposition into two component matrices, one that's words and dimensions or components, and the other one that's components and documents. Topic modeling gets to the same place, but using this generative model that involves sampling. And we're going to go into that. So let's begin with our core representation of text as tokens to get back to this earlier definition that I gave you of topic modeling as about labeling words. Here's our token table. Here we have no real OCO. It's just a document is the only content object. So each document could be a paragraph or something like that. And then we have a set of tokens that are not in serial order because some of the stop words have been removed and so forth. But it's the same idea that you have tokens within a bag or a document. And our idea is that for each one of those, we're going to label them as belonging to one or another topic. So to create a topic model of this corpus, we need to figure out what those assignments are. We need to fill in those question marks. And that idea is going to reflect why that word was chosen for that document. In using the metaphor of the shopping basket, we want to figure out why that particular item was put into this particular shopping basket. So that remember, a core idea here is that language models are based on the idea that words are chosen to be part of a message. Remember, that was Shannon's main insight in addressing the problem of communication and coming up with the concepts of information and entropy. He says, think of language as about selection, and that what we're trying to do is figure out measure what a particular selection is based on all the possible selections that could be made in making a message. This is really taking that image to heart. Because what we're really trying to do here is get at the generative mechanism for language that's going to approximate, in some sense, what humans do when humans speak from a generative perspective. So I call this an imagined process. A topic model begins with a representation of this mechanism as an imagined process. And let's look at that process. It works like this. So imagine that you want to write an essay. Imagine that your writing process goes something like this. And we know that it really doesn't, but let's think that it might follow something like this, or that this might be a simplified representation of a more complex process. So first, we assume that there actually exist in the world topics to write about, and that makes sense. In one of the readings I have, Matt Jocker's The LDA Buffet talks about thinking about LDA as a process of being at a buffet where the topics are bowls of letters. And there might be a bowl on whaling, and there might be a bowl on marriage, for example. So those topics exist, and they're culturally prescribed, you can imagine. They're not necessarily invented by the author, but the author is interested in writing about these things and becomes acquainted with them, and then decides to write something about those particular topics. So within each one of these topics, what you have is a distribution of words, like a language model. And what that means is you can imagine that every topic assigns a probability to every word in the language. But some of these words get much higher probability than other words, so that in effect the words that have very low probability are in effect not included in that topic. But mathematically they are. They're just assigned a very low probability. So each topic consists of a distribution of words, which means that some of the words have a much higher probability of being used. As I see here, they are given like culture and language. And they're also, I'm talking about topics here, they're given like the way culture is given. Actually, let me pause for a second there. What I'm trying to say is that just as language is not invented by the individual, remember we talked about langue versus parole, langue is bequeathed to people by society. In a similar way, you can imagine culture is as well, and the sort of topics that identify our culture. So an author steps into a world and becomes acquainted with these things, and they have a close connection to language. Now, the number of topics available provided by a culture are going to be smaller than the number of words in the language, or rather, the number of topics on which an author can write are going to be smaller than the number of words in a language. So words are on the order, by the definition we're using of a string, a unique string, on the order of 40, 50,000. Whereas topics we want to have a much smaller number size for, as we saw earlier, somewhere between 10 and 200. So anyway, these topics exist. And so what we do is we want to decide on which topics to write about. And we want to prioritize these topics. Now that's going to be a function of who the author is and what the author is interested in. So of all the topics available to write about that are sort of culturally given, an individual author is going to have assigned weights to those topics based on what that author knows about and what that author's interested in. So the third thing that you do, okay, so we've done two things. We know that topics exist. We then imagine that topics are preferred by authors, some topics over others. And then we pick a length of our paper or what we're writing. It could be a novel, it could be a letter or something like that. And that's going to be the number of words that we have to work with. So the first thing we do is that when the fourth thing is that when we're actually writing and putting down, when we put pen to paper and actually doing what I call the selection process of language, this is how the process is imagined from topic modeling. The first thing we do is we randomly choose a topic from the topics we have weighted through our interest, right? So if I'm Herman Melville, one of my, top topics is going to be about the ocean or the sea and sea travel. It'll be about the South Pacific. It might be about religion, for example, or any number of things that interest Herman Melville. And then once I've picked a topic, from that topic, I will be randomly picking words from that topic. And then I put that word down, and that's my first word. And I go through this process over and over. And that's how the process is imagined. It's very simplistic. But what it does is allow it to be operationalized and mathematically represented, which we're going to see in a second. So you can compare this process actually to the Library of Babel and to the language models we looked at earlier. Library of Babel was a process in which every topic, actually you can imagine Library of Babel as having no topics, right? Everything is equally possible. What is different and how this changes the Library of Babel model of language production is that it introduces an intermediate set of random variables that reduce the options and condition the selection of words in a text. Okay, so here's what this process looks like from the perspective of the data that it generates. We could imagine that instead of writing an essay, or if we were keeping tabs on the essay, we could represent the process in this structured way. You can see that it's the token table where we now have in the third column the topics assigned as a result of the two-step process that we talked about. Now we can represent that two-step process by abstracting from this table two other tables which represent those decisions that we talked about. The first decision about picking a topic from the list of topics, and then the second decision about picking a word from the list of words in the topic. You do that by, you can represent those particular dimensions of the, or steps in the process this way. So from that table you just saw, you can generate these other two tables quite simply, and in our code walkthrough we're going to do that. We'll call these the doc topic table and the topic word table. So what the doc topic table shows is that distribution of topics for a document. In other words, for a given document, it's going to show you the preference of topics. And so this is, imagine the case of somebody writing and they're going to write about something they know about. And so this distribution here in the doc topic table is going to represent that. So we can see here that in this document ID, in this particular document, topic number 4 is more represented than the other topics. This actually turns out to have a lot of topic representation. And on the right, we see that for a given topic, say topic 0, we see which words are represented. So these are actual word counts, and from these we would generate, we would estimate parameters by converting these into probability distributions. So the way this is often talked about is the table on the left shows how much each document likes or prefers a topic, and the document, the table on the right shows how much a topic prefers a word or likes a word. So here's a formal process or a formal description of the process we just looked at. You can see that each of the steps described here have a mathematical representation now. So in the first step, let's call that the cultural step. That's where the number of topics that exist out there that you can write about are established. So let's imagine that there are, say, 10 topics. So we'd go through 1 through 10, and for each one of these we would assign a distribution of words. So every topic then will have a different distribution of words. Some topics are going to privilege words about marriage, some topics are going to privilege words about whaling, as we described. Okay, so that's set the table for now. You can go in and have an author pick from those topics and actually start writing a document. So to get started in the writing process, you pick a document from the set of all documents, as it were, and then you pick a for that document, for that occasion of writing, if you will, you're going to generate a distribution of topics. So each occasion of writing, each paper to be written, as it were, is going to have a Dirichlet distribution over the topics that you picked in the first step, or that were generated in the first step. Then once you have those in hand, then you start putting pen to paper and you say, okay, first word, how am I going to pick that? Well, the first thing you do before you actually write down the word is you pick a topic from the distribution you just set up in step 2A. And then once you actually have your topic label ready to be used, you then go to your topic and then randomly pick a word from that particular topic in that table, in the topic word table. And then you have your word. That process is described on the right in what's called plate notation. That's a special case of probabilistic graphical modeling. And what it does is show all the random variables and what their dependencies are on each other, and what those squares mean is where you have more than one instance. So, for example, just looking at the beta parameter is fed into the phi random variable, and there's more than one of those. There are as many of those as there are topics, T. And then there are as many documents as there are, documents D, and there are as many words in the document as there are N. So anyway, that's just a way of visualizing what you have on the left. But what that's nice for is that can then be translated into a set of equations, which then can be manipulated algebraically. And so what we have on the bottom, we'll go into this in a little more detail, are two equations. One is the likelihood for having that particular distribution that was generated, and the other is a posterior in Bayesian terms for how to estimate the parameters that govern the selection of words and so forth. And that's what we're interested in doing, is then solving that equation, and we'll see how that works. It's actually kind of complicated, and we're just going to go over this at a very high level. Some of the papers I've asked you to look at drill down and really go into the math in enough detail. For example, the initial paper by Bly et al. Does that. So let's just look at the meaning of these random variables, though, that we have here. So theta and phi are really the most important, and they correspond to the tables that we looked at, doc topic and topic word. So theta refers to the doc topic table where the counts get normalized into probability distribution functions, or probability mass functions is what they really are. Or maybe they're density functions if we imagine it continuously. But in any case, you have a doc topic table is the representation of that topic distribution that we talked about, and the topic word table is represented by phi, which is the normalized version of the data that we looked at. And so we've already saw this, that each one of these is governed by a Dirichlet distribution, which you can imagine as an exponential distribution that matches what we know about the distribution of words in language models, for example. So this is an important side note. So there's a mathematical reason for choosing a Dirichlet prior. So you can have what's called a conjugate prior in solving the Bayesian equation. If you know something about Bayesian machine learning, that'll make sense to you. If not, don't really have to worry about that. We're going to just implement this, and you'll kind of see how it works. But another reason for picking a distribution like a Dirichlet distribution as opposed to a Gaussian distribution is that that's how we know that culture works. In other words, just as we saw in language that words, according to Zipf's law, follow a power law distribution, that happens with most things in culture, that there is a, as Pareto, the Italian sociologist, pointed out, there's that Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, where things are differentially distributed in that way. And so it makes intuitive sense that we would have a distribution like that. So just for example, we use a distribution like that to represent the topics that an author is interested in, because in general, an author is not interested in everything, and an author is really good at some small set of things. And that's true with most people. Okay, so let's look at this problem mathematically. By putting it this way, we can then phrase this as a problem of Bayesian inference, and we can see the first equation as a likelihood equation that then can be translated into this posterior distribution, which is what we're really interested in finding out. So you can see what's there. Those are the unknowns that we want in the bottom. So we want to figure out what theta is, we want to figure out what phi is, and we want to figure out what z is, which is the assignment of labels to words. And what we know, what we have given, are alpha and beta, because we choose those, and W, which stands for the token table. Those are all the words or tokens that we have selected in a given text. So that's our mathematical problem. And in order to answer that, we have to solve what's on the right, which we'll look at. Notice, though, however, that this, before getting into that, notice that these variables of interest correspond to our three tables that we're working with here. As I've already mentioned, the W and Z, I've already mentioned that we have the doc topic and topic word tables, but the W and Z variables correspond to our token table with an added column of the Z value, which is the topic assigned to each specific word. And just as I've said, the posterior here shows us what is hidden and what is given. So what's on the left is what's hidden, and what is on the right is what's given. And that's typically the case with a Bayesian problem. All right, so what we want to do is estimate theta, phi, and z, the topic ID column, based on the evidence found in our column of term IDs and the assumption of alpha and beta. But the problem is, and this is something you're just going to have to accept, the mathematics associated with solving that problem on the right are super complicated, and one of the reasons is that the denominator, the Bayesian normalization factor, is what's called intractable. You can't really solve it mathematically. So you have to, because it's a very complicated integral, so you have to resort to other methods, estimation methods, sampling methods, and things like that. And actually, Griffiths and Stivers, the paper that I asked you to read, Finding Topics in Scientific Articles, I think it's called, something like that, goes over this. And they come up with a particular approach, which is collapse-Gibbs sampling. But these are the methods that you see a lot used. One is expectation maximization. That's what Hoffman uses in the PLSI paper. Another is variational inference. That's a method that Bly prefers. And then there's Gibbs sampling, or the specific example of collapsed Gibbs sampling that is probably the most intuitive one to look at, and the one that we're going to implement in our notebook. So Gibbs sampling, just as a side note here for your edification, is a kind of Markov chain Monte Carlo method that was developed in the 1990s. And it really, according to the intellectual history of Bayesianism, it kind of saved Bayesianism as a method because it made it possible to solve a lot of these very difficult Bayesian equations that were around. It's based on an analogy to the techniques used in statistical physics to solve problems of computing probability density functions over large state spaces of energy related to simulated annealing, etc. And it's an iterative method that samples conditional distributions of the variables of the posterior. So you use Gibbs sampling when you have a full joint, when the full joint distribution of your data is not available, but you have conditional distributions, and that's going to be our theta and phi tables. So we're going to find out that you can actually work from your token table backwards and just posit some theta and phi tables with some dummy labels, and then do some sampling based on that to get to an estimate of these parameters, which is pretty cool. It's almost magical, really. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the probability of a topic given a word. That's actually what Griffiths and Stivers point out as a really clever way to approach this problem, is that you look at the frequency of topic assignments given the words that you have, and then you estimate your theta and phi from there. We're going to randomly assign these values, the topic labels, to each word, and then we're going to apply this interesting method, this collapsed Gibbs sampling method, to estimate and guess at what the proper assignment should be, and we keep iterating over this to get to some convergence. So as I say here, the result of the discovery of a simple formula to compute the probability of a topic for each word given all other topic assignments in a corpus. That's what Griffiths and Stivers contribute in their paper. And in their paper is actually, the work of those two in combination has been really, really important in this field. So here's what they end up with, is this formula, which is not as hard to understand as it looks for those of you who are not familiar with the math. Basically, you are taking those two tables. These two formulas can be directly computed using pandas on the tables that we've looked at. You simply get the estimate for how much a topic likes a word and multiply it by how much a document likes a topic for each instance of a word in a token table. So what we're going to do is this equation, imagine it stands for a row in the token table. So you're at a particular row, and you see that you have a document ID and you have a particular term, and what you want to do is say, well, how much do topics like this term given what we have in the tables, and how much does a topic like topic like a term, and then how much does a document like a topic. And then you multiply these two values, and that gives you a weighted distribution, and then you do a sample from that to pick your new assignment for the topic, and then you keep iterating until you get better and better. And I'll show you what that looks like. I know it sounds complicated the way I'm describing it. So visually, you can imagine it this way. So for any given document, you're going to have concentrations of topics. So you can see on the top, you can see that, oh, this document likes topic 1 more than it likes topic 3, say. And then you see how much each topic likes a word. You'll see, oh, a topic 1 likes this particular word more than, say, topic 4 does. And then you multiply those things together, and you end up with a product that then tells you what the topic is that's most likely to be assigned. And so here it's going to be topic 1. And as an aside, even though this is visual and looks kind of nice, I realize this may look opaque to a lot of you who are seeing this for the first time, but I'm trying to give you these sort of models or sort of visualizations of how this process works, so that when you actually look at it, when we get to the notebook, it's going to make more sense. But this is the kind of subject, just as a side note, that really benefits from just repeated, looking at the papers. Find among the papers your level of mathematical and data science expertise, and just read it a few times and really get a sense of what's going on there, because it will pay off. But it's also something that's not going to immediately make sense if this is new to you. So just hang in there. So we're going to implement this using an algorithm that's going to work like this, and then we're going to implement this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through that token table, and we're going to randomly assign each word in each document one of K topics. So it's almost as if we're handing out we're dealing out cards and saying, okay, word 5 in document 6, you get topic 1. We're going to start with that. It seems weird that you'd start randomly like that, but then once you have that, then you can go through each token and say, okay, let's assume that every other assignment was correct, but this one is not correct, and then let's do this multiplication that we just talked about to get to a weighted distribution of what the likely topic is for that particular assignment, and then we pick it, and we do that a bunch of times, like 1,000 times, and magically what happens is that the topics start to shift and distribute themselves, and you end up with things that look like topics.